The shelter was a cacophony of barks and clanging gates, its air heavy with the musty scent of too many souls in too small a space. In a corner kennel, a German shepherd named Shadow pressed himself against the cold concrete, his eyes dull, his body a map of scars and hunger. For months he'd been a ghost, trembling at every human shadow as if the world had only ever shown him pain. Yet, something in his gaze, a flicker, like a candle refusing to go out, hinted at a story waiting to unfold. You ever wonder what a dog's eyes are trying to tell you? This one had a tale of loss, loyalty, and a miracle that started with a single scent. It's the kind of story that makes you believe in second chances, the kind that'll stick with you long after the screen goes dark. Let's step into Shadow's world, where a broken heart found its way home. The wind howled through the rusted gates of an old California property, carrying the sharp tang of decayed wood and forgotten dreams. In the shadows of a crumbling barn, a German shepherd lay curled in a ball, his ribs jutting like the spokes of a broken wheel. His fur, once sleek and proud, was matted with dirt, and his eyes, dark pools of fear, darted at every snap of a twig. They called him Shadow later, but back then he was just a ghost, abandoned to a world that had chewed him up and spit him out. Nobody knew how long he'd been there, scavenging scraps from the cracked earth. How does a dog end up so lost, you wonder? The day the rescue team found him, the air was thick with dust, kicked up by their boots crunching on gravel. Shadow didn't bark or growl. He just shrank deeper into the corner, his tail tucked so tight it seemed glued to his belly. The rescuers' voices, soft and coaxing, bounced off the barn's hollow walls. But to Shadow, they might as well have been thunder. They wrapped him in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent, a stark contrast to the sour stench of his hiding place. In the van, he trembled, his shallow breaths fogging the window. What had this dog been through to fear a gentle hand? At the shelter, the clamor of barking dogs and clanging metal gates was relentless, a chaotic symphony that made Shadow's ears twitch in panic. The place was overflowing, kennels stacked like crates in a warehouse, each holding a story of abandonment. Shadow's kennel was a concrete box, cold and gray, with a single frayed blanket that did little to warm him. He pressed himself against the back wall, as if trying to melt into it, his eyes fixed on the floor. Volunteers passed by, their sneakers squeaking on the tiles, but he wouldn't look up. Was there any hope left in that shattered heart? The shelter staff tried everything, treats, toys, even singing softly, but Shadow stayed locked in his own world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror his trauma. His food bowl sat untouched unless the room was empty, and even then, he'd nibble just enough to survive. One volunteer, a guy named Tom, swore he saw Shadow flinch at the sound of a slamming door, like it triggered some awful memory. It was as if the dog was carrying a secret too heavy for his frail frame. Could anyone reach a soul so deeply scarred? By the end of his first month, the staff started to whisper about Shadow's fate. In an overcrowded shelter, a dog too broken to adopt was a heartbreak waiting to happen. Yet, amidst the chaos, a faint spark of hope flickered. A young woman named Kelsey, with a voice as warm as a summer breeze, began sitting near his kennel, not pushing, just existing. Her presence was like a quiet promise, a hint that maybe, just maybe, someone could crack through Shadow's walls. Would her patience be enough to start his healing? The shelter's veterinary room smelled sharp, like antiseptic and steel, a world away from the musty barn where Shadow had been found. His frail body lay on the exam table, shivering under the cold glare of a flickering bulb. The vet, Dr. Ruiz, traced the raw, rope-like scars around Shadow's neck, marks of a collar left too tight for too long. His fur was patchy, his skin hot with infection, and his weight barely half what a German shepherd's should be. Every touch, even the gentlest, made him flinch, his low whimpers slicing through the room's sterile hush. What kind of cruelty leaves scars like these? Dr. Ruiz worked with steady hands, cleaning wounds and administering shots, but Shadow's eyes told a deeper story. They were wide, unblinking, like he was braced for a blow that never came. The vet's clipboard listed his ailments: malnutrition, dehydration, a nagging cough. But the real wound was invisible, locked in his mind. He'd freeze at the clink of a metal tray, his ears pinning back as if the sound dragged him to some awful memory. The staff whispered about his trauma, wondering if a dog so haunted could ever heal. Could medicine fix a heart that refused to trust? Back in his kennel, Shadow's fear turned the simplest things into battles. Feeding time was a ritual of patience. Volunteers would slide a bowl of kibble through the gate and retreat, knowing he wouldn't eat with eyes on him. The shelter's air was heavy with the warm, yeasty scent of dog food, but Shadow's bowl often stayed full, his hunger no match for his dread. At night, when the lights dimmed and the barks faded to soft whines, he'd curl into a tight ball, his tail shielding his face. Was he dreaming of a time before the pain? The staff tried coaxing him with treats, bits of chicken that filled the kennel with a savory tang, but Shadow only stared, his nose twitching faintly. One volunteer, a wiry guy named Marco, joked that Shadow was on a hunger strike against humans, but his eyes were soft with worry. They'd treated his body, stitching wounds and boosting his strength, but his spirit remained a fortress, its gates slammed shut. Every day, Kelsey, the quiet woman from before, would sit nearby, her presence a steady hum in the chaos. Could her persistence chip away at his walls? By the second month, Shadow's fur began to grow back, a faint sheen returning to his coat, but his fear clung like damp fog. The shelter's morning routine, doors creaking, water hoses hissing, sent him scrambling to the back of his kennel. Yet something tiny shifted. One day when Kelsey dropped her pen and it rolled near the bars, Shadow didn't recoil. He just watched, his head tilted as if her stillness was a language he was starting to understand. Was this the first crack in his armor, a whisper of hope? The shelter's break room smelled of burnt coffee and damp towels, a cozy chaos where staff stole moments to recharge. Kelsey, with her messy bun and ink-stained fingers, sat cross-legged on the floor outside Shadow's kennel, a worn paperback in her hands. Her voice, soft as a lullaby, drifted through the bars, reading tales of far-off adventures while Shadow's ears twitched, catching every word. The other dogs barked at passing shadows, but Shadow stayed still, his eyes flicking toward her, not with fear, but something new, like a spark in a long, dark cave. Who knew a dog could listen like that? Kelsey didn't push. She'd just sit, her sneakers scuffing the concrete, letting the rhythm of her words wrap around Shadow like a warm blanket. The kennel's air was thick with the faint musk of fur and bleach, but her presence cut through it, steady and unthreatening. One day she dropped a bookmark, a scrap of ribbon that fluttered to the floor, and Shadow sniffed it, his nose brushing the bars for the first time. The staff buzzed about it later, marveling at this tiny victory. Could a dog so broken really start to trust? Then came Claire, a physiotherapist with a laugh like wind chimes, who wandered into the shelter on a whim, not planning to adopt. She'd heard about Shadow from a friend and found herself drawn to his kennel, where the dim light cast soft shadows on his fur. She mimicked Kelsey's trick, sitting quietly with a book, her voice weaving stories of sailors and storms. The shelter's evening hush amplified every sound. The creak of a gate, the drip of a leaky faucet. Yet Shadow's gaze locked onto Claire, his head tilting as if decoding her calm. Was this stranger sparking something Kelsey hadn't? Claire kept coming back, her visits as regular as the sunrise, each one marked by small miracles. One evening, she read a line about a lost ship finding harbor, and Shadow inched forward, his paws scraping the concrete, stopping just short of the bars. The air felt charged, like the universe was holding its breath. Kelsey, watching from afar, swore it was a sign. Two souls, both a little lost, finding each other in the quiet. Even the other volunteers noticed Shadow's eyes following Claire, bright with a cautious hope. What was it about her that reached him? By the end of the month, Shadow's tiny steps toward trust were the shelter's favorite story. He'd stopped cowering when Claire approached, and once, when she left her scarf by the kennel, he nudged it closer, his nose leaving a faint smudge. The gesture was small, but it hummed with meaning, like a promise he wasn't ready to voice. Claire's visits felt like a bridge, linking Shadow's shadowed past to a flicker of light. Could this bond, so fragile yet fierce, lead him somewhere new? The shelter's visiting room was a patchwork of scuffed linoleum and faded posters, its air tinged with the faint sweetness of pine cleaner. Claire sat on a creaky folding chair, her hands fidgeting as she watched Shadow pace the room's edges, his claws clicking softly against the floor. She'd been coming for weeks, but today felt different. Her jacket carried a new scent, sharp and metallic, from a session with a patient, Captain Jordan, a veteran with PTSD. Shadow froze mid-step, his nose twitching, then lifted his head, staring at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. What was it about that smell that grabbed him? Claire couldn't shake the moment. Back at her clinic, the air hummed with the low buzz of a fan and the earthy scent of herbal tea as she worked with Jordan, whose quiet strength hid a storm of memories. She mentioned Shadow's reaction, half laughing about how the dog sniffed. Like I was hiding treats. Jordan's eyes sharpened and he asked about the dog's markings. A white patch on the chest, a scar above the left eye. His voice dropped as he spoke of his war dog, Shadow, lost in an Afghani raid 3 years ago. Could it really be the same dog? The pieces started falling together like a puzzle the universe had been holding back. Claire returned to the shelter, her boots crunching on the gravel lot, her mind racing. She showed Kelsey a photo Jordan had given her. A younger, prouder Shadow, ears perked beside a dusty Humvee. Kelsey's jaw dropped, her coffee mug nearly slipping. The shelter's log had no history on Shadow, just a stray found in ruin, but the markings matched. The air seemed to thrum with possibility, like fate was nudging them forward. Was this dog carrying a soldier's story? Claire arranged for Jordan to visit. Her stomach knotted with hope and nerves. The shelter's hallway echoed with the distant yips of other dogs, but inside the visiting room it was just her, Jordan and Shadow, who crouched warily in the corner. Jordan knelt, his voice low and steady, repeating Shadow's name like a prayer. The dog's ears flicked, and when Claire caught a whiff of Jordan's leather jacket, worn from years in the field, Shadow's tail gave a single, hesitant wag. Was this the moment they'd all been waiting for? By the visit's end, the truth was undeniable. Jordan shared stories of Shadow's courage, how he'd sniffed out danger, how he'd curled up beside him on sleepless nights. Claire watched. Shadow's eyes softened, as if memories were unlocking behind them. The room felt smaller, warmer, like it held more than just 3 souls catching their breath. This wasn't just a dog and a veteran. It was a vinculo, a bond forged in fire, waiting to be reclaimed. What would this reunion spark next? The shelter's visiting room glowed softly under a single bulb, its light pooling on the worn floor like a quiet promise. Claire stood by the door, her breath catching as Jordan knelt a few feet from Shadow, who crouched in the corner, eyes wide and wary. The air carried the faint tang of wet fur and old wood, but Jordan's leather jacket, scuffed from years in the desert, seemed to pull Shadow's focus, his nose twitching like he was chasing a memory. Jordan's voice, rough but steady, called out a command from their old days. Shadow, sit. The room froze, and then, holy cow, Shadow's ears perked, and he obeyed, his tail thumping once. Was this really happening? Claire's heart pounded as she watched, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. The shelter's distant hum, clanging gates, a volunteer's muffled laugh, faded into nothing. Shadow took a trembling step toward Jordan, then another, his claws scraping the linoleum with a sound like hesitant Morse code. When Jordan extended a hand, Shadow didn't flinch. He leaned in, sniffing, then let out a low, joyful whine that cracked the silence. Claire swore she felt the universe sigh, like it had orchestrated this moment. How could a dog remember after so long? Jordan's face softened, his eyes glinting as he murmured, "Good boy, Shadow." The dog surged forward, pressing his head against Jordan's chest, his whole body shaking with what could only be relief. The room seemed to shrink, wrapping them in a bubble where time didn't exist. Just a soldier and his dog, reunited after years of loss. Claire, blinking back tears, caught the glint of Jordan's dog tags under his shirt, their faint jingle echoing shadows past. Could this reencontro heal wounds deeper than any scar? The moment stretched, raw and electric, as Shadow licked Jordan's hand, his tail now wagging like a metronome. Outside, the California dusk painted the sky in pinks and golds, its light slipping through a cracked window to dance on the walls. Claire laughed softly, wiping her eyes, and said, "Guess he's been waiting for you all along." Jordan nodded, his voice thick, and shared a story of Shadow saving his squad, his loyalty a lifeline in chaos. How does a bond like that survive so much pain? By the time they left the room, Shadow trotted beside Jordan, his head high, no longer the ghost of the shelter. The other volunteers peeked in, their whispers buzzing like static, marveling at the transformation. Claire felt a warmth settle in her chest like she'd witnessed something sacred. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a spark, a chance for healing that reached beyond the kennel's bars. What would this newfound connection mean for them all? Jordan's small apartment smelled of cedar and fresh paint, a quiet haven where sunlight spilled through a window, warming the hardwood floor. Shadow patted in, his nails clicking softly, no longer the trembling ghost of the shelter, but a dog with purpose. He curled up beside Jordan's chair, eyes tracking his every move as Jordan worked through therapy exercises Claire had designed for his PTSD. The room hummed with the faint tick of a clock, but when Jordan's hands shook or his breath hitched, Shadow nudged his knee, grounding him like an anchor. Isn't it wild how a dog can sense what words can't say? Claire visited often, her arrival marked by the jingle of her keys and the faint scent of lavender from her scarf. She'd sit cross-legged on the rug, sketching therapy plans while Shadow sprawled nearby, his tail thumping lazily. She noticed how Shadow's presence steadied Jordan. His nightmares grew rarer, his smiles quicker. The apartment's air felt lighter, like hope was seeping into the cracks of their wounds. Claire jotted notes, but her heart was in the quiet moments, watching them heal together. Could this trio be building something bigger than therapy? Shadow wasn't just a comfort. He was a spark. Jordan started taking him on walks, the crunch of leaves under their feet echoing through the crisp California mornings. Neighbors waved, drawn to Shadow's proud stride and Jordan's easy grin, a far cry from the man who once avoided crowds. One day, a kid tossed a ball, and Shadow bounded after it, his joyful bark ringing like a bell. Jordan laughed, a sound Claire hadn't heard before, and she thought, "This is Cura, healing through purpose." Was Shadow teaching them both how to live again? The bond deepened in small, sacred ways. At night, Jordan would read aloud, his voice steady as Shadow rested his head on his lap, the lamplight casting soft shadows on the walls. Claire joined them sometimes, bringing stories of her own, and the room would fill with a warmth that felt like home. She saw Jordan's confidence grow. He even started volunteering at the shelter, Shadow at his side, helping other dogs find trust. It was like the universe had stitched their paths together for this. How does a dog become a guide for broken hearts? By spring, Shadow's transformation was undeniable. He'd gained weight, his coat gleaming, and his eyes held a spark that made strangers stop and stare. Jordan, too, was different, less haunted, more open. His PTSD no longer a shadow, but a story he was rewriting. Claire felt it in herself, too, a quiet strength from being part of their journey. They were a team, bound by a proposito that went beyond survival. What new chapter would this healing open for them? The park near Jordan's apartment buzzed with the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Claire and Jordan sat on a weathered bench, Shadow sprawled at their feet, his tongue lolling as he watched a squirrel dart up a tree. Their meetings had shifted from therapy sessions to something softer, shared coffee runs, quiet laughs, and stories swapped under the rustling canopy of oaks. Claire's fingers brushed Jordan's as she handed him a thermos, and the air crackled with a warmth that felt like more than friendship. Ever notice how love sneaks up like a dog stealing your sandwich? Shadow, of course, was the glue. He'd say, nudge them closer during walks, his leash tangling their legs until they were laughing, breathless in the golden afternoon light. The park's gravel paths crunched under their steps, and kids would run up, petting Shadow, who soaked up the attention like a king. Claire saw Jordan's guard drop with every smile, his PTSD no longer a wall but a shadow fading in the sun. She'd catch him watching her, his eyes soft, and think, this is what healing looks like. Could this trio's bond grow into something deeper? One evening, in Jordan's apartment, the air was thick with the savory aroma of takeout pizza. They sat on the floor, Shadow snoring between them, his head on Claire's knee. The room glowed with the flicker of a candle, its light dancing on the walls like a silent melody. Jordan shared a memory of a starry night in Afghanistan. Shadow at his side, and Claire felt her heart tilt. She wasn't just his therapist anymore. When their hands met over Shadow's fur, neither pulled away. Was this Aimer blooming where pain once stood? Their connection deepened through small rituals. Claire started joining Jordan's shelter volunteering, her voice mingling with his as they coaxed scared dogs to trust. The shelter's concrete halls echoed with the clatter of bowls and the soft yips of hope, but it was Shadow who stole the show, prancing like he was teaching a masterclass in courage. One day, Jordan surprised Claire with a job offer, a clinic, combining her physiotherapy skills with canine therapy, inspired by Shadow's magic. The universe, it seemed, was cheering them on. How does a dog spark a whole new dream? By summer, their love was undeniable. They'd walk Shadow at dusk, the sky streaked with purples and oranges, his tail wagging like a metronome. Claire moved closer to Jordan's place, their lives weaving together as naturally as Shadow's loyalty. The three of them felt like a family, each healing the others in ways they hadn't planned. It was more than therapy. It was a life rebuilt on trust and hope. What would this love create next? The shelter's courtyard shimmered with morning dew, the air alive with the crisp scent of eucalyptus and the chatter of volunteers. Shadow pranced through the gate, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian, no longer the broken dog who'd cowered in a kennel. Beside him, Jordan and Claire carried a box of toys for the other dogs, their laughter mingling with the jangle of Shadow's collar. He wasn't just a visitor, he was a symbol of Super Assam, trotting proudly to greet trembling strays, his calm eyes saying, "You can trust again." Ever seen a dog become a hero like that? Their visits were magic. Shadow would lie beside nervous pups, his steady breaths a quiet lesson in lealtad, while Jordan knelt nearby, his voice gentle, sharing tips he'd learned from his own redemption. The shelter's gravel crunched under their feet, and the sun warmed the concrete, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with hope. Claire, now running their canine therapy clinic, watched dogs inch closer to Shadow, mirroring his journey, from fear to strength. It was like he carried a spark of empatia, lighting up every corner he touched. Could one dog really change so many lives? Back at the clinic, the air buzzed with the soft whir of a fan and the faint tang of antiseptic wipes. Shadow had his own bed in the corner, where he'd flop dramatically, earning grins from veterans and clients working through PTSD or injuries. Claire and Jordan moved as a team, her physiotherapy blending with his knack for canine trust building, their love a quiet current beneath it all. Clients swore Shadow understood their pain, his head resting on their knees during tough sessions. Was this transformation what the universe had planned all along? Their story spread, a beacon for others. At a local fundraiser, the crowd's applause echoed through a grassy field, the evening air thick with the smoky scent of barbecue. Shadow, wearing a bright bandana, mingled with kids and donors, his tail wagging like a flag of victory. Jordan shared their journey, his voice steady while Claire squeezed his hand, her eyes on Shadow, who'd once been unadoptable. The shelter director called him a miracle, proof that connection could rewrite even the darkest stories. How? Does a dog become a teacher of hope? Now Shadow's legacy lives on. He and his humans return to shelters across California, their van humming down highways, the radio's soft twang mixing with Shadow's contented sighs. Each visit is a reminder. Healing starts with a single step, a sniff, a moment of trust. Claire and Jordan, bound by amour and purpose, know they're part of something bigger. A redemption that started with a scared dog and a scent. Shadows. Eyes once dull with fear, now shine with a wisdom that says, we made it. What's next for a trio that's already changed the world? Shadow's story isn't just about a dog. It's about the kind of love and loyalty that can pull you through the darkest nights. From a trembling stray in a forgotten barn to a beacon of hope for shelters and souls alike, he showed us that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, slow, and sometimes it starts with something as simple as a scent or a quiet voice reading nearby. Claire and Jordan found more than a dog. They found each other, and together they built a life that proves redemption is real. Isn't it amazing how the smallest creatures can teach us the biggest lessons? Sometimes the greatest masters have 4 paws and a wagging tail. So what about you? Have you ever had an animal change your life? Drop your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that remind us why we keep believing in second chances.